Okay, so what we want to get started with is I want to show you where the paste bin is for this class. So this paste bin is going to contain all of the commands that I'm going to be giving you for this class. So it's 5 lowercase s, capital G, the number 7, capital R, lowercase p, lowercase g, and the number 5. This is going to have the course materials, which you can see your slides are right here. There are lab manuals right here. The link to the virtual machine that we're going to be using for this class is right here. And then the basics that we're going to be following for the class. All that information is right here. Okay. All right. Burp Suite. Burp Suite is hands down probably the most popular web app testing tool today. But what I often find when I talk to people about Burp Suite is a lot of people really aren't comfortable with the tool. They'll say things like, well, I use it. And, you'll start asking people like, well, do you load your own fuzz database? Are you comfortable with doing Burp extensions and extending Burp and adding your own plugins to it or integrating Burp with other tools? And you kind of look over and you notice that they kind of gloss over. And, I've really not been a fan of teaching Burp. And I guess I just have to be honest with that. The reason I was not a fan of teaching Burp for so long was not that I didn't like Burp. I actually very much like the tool. I use it. But what I found is you really need to know WebApp to use Burp. That's just the simple truth. So as a teacher, I try to teach manual WebApp without really a lot of focus on proxies in general. Not really a bias towards Burp. Very much the same way I felt about Kali Linux Backtrack was I really tried to teach underlying methodologies of how to pen test, more so than teaching the tools. So, I'm not really a big tool fan in general. I'm really more of a, if you know how this works, you can test. Now, I've been teaching a lot of web app lately, and I feel like I've covered a lot of stuff. So I do think it's reasonable to cover a Burp Suite class, especially because I'm finding people want to know things about doing Burp with like Android, doing Burp with, iPhone, doing Burp with, doing extensions and things like that. And I do think if you're comfortable with manual web app testing, then yeah, Burp is the very next logical step because I feel feature-wise, it gives you the best access to get in there and drive. There really isn't anything on the market that allows you to really get in there and drive Burp. It allows you to really get in and drive like Burp Suite does. And in that regard, I would say it is, yes, the best web app testing tool on the market. So you hear people make that argument that it's the best web app testing tool on the market, and they're right, as long as you understand the context, right? It's not a true point-and-click web app vulnerability scanner. I would not use it for that. It's really a pen tester tool. If you're not really, really comfortable with manual web app testing, I would not recommend Burp. It's just, I think, too complicated of an interface. I think way too confusing for a new user. And again, as a teacher, that's what kind of fueled the rationale why I've gone so long without teaching Burp. Okay, so off my soapbox, let's get started hacking. Now, I'm going to cover, for the sake of this course, I'm going to cover some manual testing. Those of you guys who've taken classes with me before, please forgive me because I'm covering the same basics that I always cover. But for the sake of being thorough, I have to show it, right? If you're not comfortable with manual testing, Burp is going to be useless to you. So again, I have to cover this, so please forgive me, okay? If you're one of the guys who's taken my classes before, please forgive me because it's the same basics, but that's why they're called basics, because they don't change. Okay, so Let's drive. Okay, let's just make sure all you guys can. Yes, I am recording the session. I appreciate the kind words there, Stuart. Thanks a lot. Okay, and let's make sure. Can everybody see my screen okay before I start throwing up the PowerPoint? Okay, looks like you guys can see my screen. All right, let's start driving. Okay, guys, so let's jump right in and let's start dealing with Appsec. And the first thing that I run into with Appsec, whoops, microphone's not on. There we go. Okay, the first thing that I run into with Appsec is just how complex it feels. It's tough. I think most of us who came from a network or system administration background often feel like WebApp, smashed dead in your face, like out of nowhere. The world was so easy for those of us who were sysadmin, netadmin guys. And then to make this transition to the AppSec world, especially if you're like me and did not have a strong development background, it was tough. Most of you came up the old-fashioned way. You were help desk, you were PC tech, you were systems administrator, you were network administrator. In me personally, that was my learning path, right? I started literally selling computers at Staples. Then I got a help desk job. Then I got a system administration job. Then I got a network administration job. Then I got a security job. Like I literally went through those steps on the systems and network side. Then I became an intrusion analyst. So then I was an IDS guy first. Then I became a pen tester. So I kind of felt like that's the way nature intended, right? So if you guys look at this picture, how many of you guys, you feel comfortable here? It's a rat's nest, but you feel comfortable here. You can go into that network and look at that rat's nest and you feel good. This is you. You're like, hey man, this is where I came from. I've been here for years. You're like a pig in the mud. You're like, this is my place. Well, around 2008, for me as a pen tester, pen testing started to move more toward AppSec. And I, for one, struggled. From 2008 to about 2010, I would say those were my hardest years as a pen tester because transitioning into the AppSec world for me was extremely difficult. Like I said, not having not having a development background, it was just hell. Just hell. It just seemed like everybody just knew so many things that I couldn't find a logical path for how to learn them. It was so hard. Okay, so guys, as I look at an app and you look at this diagram of an app, right, and you see like the data level, the data logic level, the UI of the APIs and the business logic layer and how all these things connect together and how they interact with web services. And when I saw this stuff, it just scared me, quite frankly. I didn't get it. How does all this work? How does this stuff talk? I didn't get it. I felt lost. That's just the simple truth. I just felt lost. I tried to look for places that could help me, right? And it took me a couple of years, and I finally came up with my methodology, and that's what I'm going to teach you right now, right? So you're going to find that a lot of people are very comfortable with things like Turing's primitives, programming logic, data structures and algorithms, object-oriented programming. And if you've got a strong computer science background and this stuff makes a lot of sense to you, you're going to find that I'm a very different teacher. because I don't teach this way, right? I am a normal guy, right? I like sports, I like barbecuing, you know, I'm a regular guy, and I teach security that way, okay? So my first exposure with trying to figure out this stuff was something called the OWASP testing guide. The OWASP testing guide. And for me, it was absolutely the worst thing in the world. Nothing confused me more. Nothing made it so difficult for me to do pen testing because I literally thought it was a tactical guide to performing penetration tests. So I'll show you what I mean. So let's say I go here. So I open up this doc and it's awesome, right? Again, guys, I'm not saying it's bad, but to think that it's literally a guide that you use to perform a web app pen test, it is not. So it breaks down your basic structure of penetration testing, right? OWASP testing, principles of testing, testing techniques, deriving security requirements, right? Very good. Then you start scrolling down in here and you say, okay, well, here's our framework, right? Here's what you do before testing. Here's what you do during testing. Here's what you do during development. Here's what you do during deployment. Here's what you do during maintenance and basic operations. And here's how the SDLC works. Really good. Then they've got all these steps, right? So you can see that it starts off with, here's my checklist. Here's how information gathering works, and then they've got all these different steps, for information gathering, right? Conduct search engine discovery, fingerprint the web server, enumerate the applications on the web server, identify application entry points, map execution paths, So again, I didn't have a development background, so I was like, okay, this is the playbook. Take this. I can't go wrong. Follow the playbook. And what I started to run into is, let's say, for example, right here, 4.2.3, and it says, one second, I'm just doing this so I can paste this in here for you guys. There you go. All right, so there's the link to where I'm at right now so you guys can all see. All right, so now it says, review web server meta files for information leakage. And, it says, okay, so here's an example of a file you should look for. You should look for an example, a robots.txt file, right? So a robots.txt file is going to give you a lot of information that, for example, places that it doesn't want. So here's Facebook's robots.txt file, and you can see that this is the file that the server uses to tell Google and other search engines, here's what I don't want you to spider. Please don't look in these folders. And it tells you as the attacker, right? So here, if you're Baidu Spider, don't look in these places. If you're Bing, don't look at these places, right? If you're Google, don't look at these places. So it's really good because it gives you a really good list of places, things to say, hey, these are places that Google doesn't, that the app doesn't want me to spider. So these are places me as an attacker, I should look. And that's awesome. It really is awesome, right? But there's so many other files. So I'll give an example. Here's another file, like a PHP info file. There you go. So a PHP info file is a file that tells you so much about a server. right? Configurations, libraries. Uh, it's certainly not a bad thing. People use it when they build a server. You'll often find that they throw a PHP info file there. So during that building process, they can check to make sure that they did everything correctly. So there's certainly nothing wrong with having it. But then once you move that server from staging or dev into, production, you want to remove things like your PHP info file, right? So it's an example of a PHP info file. And for you guys who want to know how I find them, here you go. Okay. All right. Well, the OWASP testing guide doesn't tell you to look for PHP info files. He tells you to look for meta files for information leakage. And he gives an example of a robots.txt file, right? There's other files like, file type AXD, right? And you'll see that these AXD files have all kinds of juicy information in them. There's all kinds of data in these suckers, right? Bad boys are always full of data. Again, the problem with this kind of stuff is I finally realized after a few years, I really wish I had learned it sooner, that the OWASP testing guide is really kind of like Wikipedia, right? The idea is to be able to give you information about something, but it's not really meant to be like a tactical, like procedural step-by-step document for penetration testing. What it's really designed to do is, let's say you're reading a pen test report and it says it found XPath injection. You can go look up what XPath injection is. If you're trying to build a test plan, right? A test plan is going to be a document that describes the process. Well, then the OWASP testing guide is very good, but it's not a procedural like checklist that I would follow, right? It's not tactical enough, and that's really what I gained. So I really struggled with that. So then that turned into my next problem. Well, if the OWASP testing guide isn't what exactly I do, what do you do? And then you hear guys say, well, you have to do manual. So then you're like, well, how do you do that? How do you do that? If I have to do manual, what do you mean I have to do manual? Okay, how? So I needed something that I could do. I needed a way that worked for me. Again, me not having a development background was the primary contributor to this. So what I did for my first 2 years was literally, I was just the tool guy. I ran every tool that I could possibly find against every single website, bar none. Hands down, if there was a tool I found on PacketStorm or, Root Shell or anywhere, Millworm, someone was talking about a hacking tool and it did web stuff, dark code, man, anywhere. I ran it against the site, figuring that, if I run enough tools, at least I won't miss anything. And that was some pretty flawed logic, but it was the best I could do at the time. And I watched a lot of guys do a lot of manual testing and I asked a lot of questions. I got a lot of really bad answers, but over time I kind of derived my process, right? So I want you to use my process, and it doesn't mean that you have to keep my process, but you definitely can build on my process. So what I do is I ask myself 3 questions. On every single page of a website, I ask 3 questions. If the answer to one of those questions is yes, then I know the attack path that I need to go down. So that becomes like my playbook. You know, it's really easy for me to just go, okay, I'm looking at a page, ask myself 3 questions. If the answer to question 1 is no, move to question 2. Answer to question 2 is yes, go down this attack path. That's it. So my 3 questions are, is it talking to a database? Can I or someone else see what I type? Does it reference a file? These are my 3 basic questions, and it's easy for me to flow from there. So is it talking to a database? So is it talking to a database? Well, if I see parameter passing, something equals something in the address bar, then for me, I go, okay, he's talking to a database. Let me see if I can do something with it. So as an example, you'll see that I'm looking at this website. And then if you look here, there's nothing after the address. There's nothing here. So for me, the answer to question number 1 is no. So I'm looking for something called parameter passing. When I look for parameter passing, if I click one of these links, what you see after the address bar is what I'm talking about. This stuff here is what I'm going to call parameter passing. So you're going to see a page name followed by a question mark, followed by a parameter name with an equal sign, and then the parameter value. So it's page name, question mark, parameter name, parameter value. So in this case, the page name is bookdetail.aspx. Question mark, the parameter name is ID equals the parameter value, which is 1. This is what I look for. Now, when I see this, I know, hey, there's parameter passing. And the way that I test this parameter passing is right here. I'm going to insert a single quote right here. And I'm going to load that single quote either immediately after the parameter value or in place of the parameter value. Now, as soon as I do that, you'll see that the website blows up. When it blows up, I look at the error. So you can see right here, it's an SQL error. You keep seeing SQL all throughout, right? That's SQL injection. Now, sometimes you have different types of parameters. So you have, if you see everything in the address bar, we're going to call this a GET request. So when you have a GET request, the parameter passing is in the address bar. Now that's not always the case, because anytime your system is doing a critical transaction, you should not be using a GET request. So if you're doing a database insert, a database update, a login, anytime you're doing a purchase, anytime you're doing a critical transaction, you should not use a GET request. The developer should be using a POST request. So if, for example, you see that I go to this login page, right? Now that I'm on this login page, you're going to see that I'm going to use, type in the word hello with a password hello. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fire up Burp Suite right quick. So I'm firing up Burp Suite, and I'm going to use Foxy Proxy to set myself to Burp Suite. Okay. All right. So now that's good. And we'll turn intercept off. Okay. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say go. Okay. Now when you look at that, right, my login failed. Now I'm going to go look at this in here. Now, when I look at this post, if I go look, this post request has parameters. So as you're looking at this post request, you can see, hey, I have parameters. So you have parameter passing. What you would do is right here, you would say, I want to mess with these parameters. So you would insert, your single quote here, right? In here's where I sent the username. Here's where I sent the password, right here. So if I want, you can say this. Here's where you perform that attack. Now this is why you use a proxy, because I can't manually interact with it in the browser. So using a proxy like Burp Suite, Paros, WebScarab, Fiddler, you can use a proxy because that's what's going to allow you to get in there and mess with these things. Okay. All right. So if I insert my single quote, I inserted my single quote. Let's see. Okay, looks like there's some students that didn't get there. All right, so I'll handle that at our next breaks. We had a few students who didn't get their login information. All right, so if you look here, I inserted a single quote, and obviously I found another SQL injection, right? No, look what we found. Okay, so here we're actually seeing that it's not SQL injection, right? It's XML or XPath injection. Now, if you go back to the OWASP testing guide, the OWASP testing guide gives the impression, if you get down to input validation testing, that you test for Oracle, you test for MySQL, you test for SQL Server, you test for LDAP injection, you test for ORM injection, you test for XML injection, you test for server-side include injection, you test for XPath injection, right? You test for IMAP and SMTP injection, you test for generic code injection, you test for Postgres, right? And in reality, what you're doing is if you look for parameter passing and you insert your single quote, then when it breaks, you read the error message, and then based on that error message, that's when you know what type of vulnerability it is. So the real part is it's not knowing that it's SQL injection or LDAP injection or whatever it is. It's going to have parameter passing. Whatever the backend data store is, that's the type of injection it's going to be. So if you have parameter passing on webmail, the backend data store is probably LDAP. So when you insert your parameter in the address bar or in the post request, you'll probably get LDAP errors. Same with a VPN, like maybe you have a web interface to a VPN, right? And you do that, and the backend data store is probably LDAP, right? That's what gives you LDAP errors. You get LDAP syntax in there, and there's your LDAP injection. If the data store is XML, right? You insert your single quote, and then, when you do that, you get an XML error, you got XML injection. You don't literally test for LDAP injection, XML injection, IMAP injection. Like, you don't literally test that way. What you're doing is you say, every time I see parameter passing, I want to insert stuff in it so I can break it, right? Now, here's where something like Burp Suite is good for you, you have something called the FuzzDB. So if you have the FuzzDB, you have a project out on, it used to be Google Code, now it's out on GitHub. So if you go out here to the FuzzDB, you're going to see that I'm going to click Attack. Let's go to Discovery. So I'm going to click Discovery. Now I'll choose Attack. Sorry about that. So I'll go to Attack, and I want to do SQL injection. So now I'm going to go under Detect, and let's do, how big is that? 42 lines? Yeah, there you go. So I taught you, hey, every single time that there is a parameter, I want you to insert this and test it. Well, if you just try a single quote, that's usually pretty good. But there are cases where somebody has done something to stop. So maybe a single quote doesn't work. So what you may end up doing is you may end up saying, well, how about a double quote? How about a semicolon? How about a single quote semicolon? So here's an example of a semiquote and a single quote and semicolon. So you see here that you've got a payload that has a single quote, a semicolon, and an SQL statement that does a version call with a wait for delay. Now what you probably want to do is you probably want to try every single one of these. So every time you see parameter passing, you want to try every single one of these. And then maybe you want to try every single one of these for MySQL. So this is what makes it interesting to use something like Burp Suite, because now that you want to, we call this fuzz, you want to try a whole lot of different stuff against this particular parameter. You go, you know, I want to try more against that one. I want to try a whole lot more. This is when you say, you know what, I can send this thing over to intruder, and now I can try a whole lot more. So let's say I go here, I'm just clicking on this link, and if I send a single quote right here, that seems to work really well, right? But maybe I want to try a whole lot more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a real quick fuzz database. So here's a little fuzz database that I made a few days ago, and it's got a bunch of different SQL injections. So you can see it's got some with the quote, some without a quote, some with the number, some with the closing parenthesis, you know, unbalanced parentheses, some with the unbalanced parenthesis and a single quote. So for me, it's really nice, because let's say now I'm inside of Burp Suite and I find that same parameter, right? So here's the one that I found, right? And now you say, okay, what I want to do is I want to send it to the intruder. So I send it to intruder. Relax, guys. I'm going to cover all this a little later. Okay. I send it to intruder. I go over here to intruder. And now in the positions, you can see that I'm saying, you know, right here is where I want to send every single one of those, right? I don't just want to try a single quote. I tried a single quote. That looks bad. Now, let me try every single one in my list to see if I find anything very interesting, right? So I'm going to jump over to payloads, and then in my payloads, I'm just going to paste those payloads right here. See that? So I paste them all right here, and let's just start an attack real quick. Okay, so you can see here that it's doing every single one of those, and he's going to try to see what the results are. So let's go check one of these. So I'm checking one, and I'm going to look at the response. And I like to see the response in HTML because I'm lazy. Okay. And now if I look right there, right, incorrect exception syntax near this keyword. Now if I render it, you'll see that it looks just like the real page, and I go, that's not the attack that I want, right? Each one of these is trying to get a username, a database name, or a database version. That's what I'm trying for each one of these. But you're seeing space or one equals convert int, right? At version or at database, right? This whole series is not working, right? Whoops. This whole series is not working. They're not giving me a suitable injection. The injection is triggering the error, right? Incorrect syntax near the keyword or, right? It's triggering the error, but it's not giving me any data back. So let's try the next batch. The next batch has a single quote, right? The next batch is exactly the same as the first batch, right? They're the same, but this batch has a single quote. So now, hopefully, if I click on one of these, maybe I'll have some data in there. So when I click there, no, you can see here that he says tick or one in equals convert int user. Okay, so it's definitely echoing back what I sent it, but it's not executing what I sent it, right? Because what I want to see is the username, and then this next one, I want to see the database version, and this next one, excuse me, DB name, then the database version. That's what I want to see here. So that batch is not working. So let's try the next batch. So the next batch has a number, right? It has a number without a single quote. Okay? So if you look here, this batch works, right? There's the username, DBO, right? The database name one didn't work, but there's the database version. So this one or one convert, this trick is working, right? One or one convert, right? One or one equals convert. And then what you want in parentheses, that's working. Because as I go through each one, right, there's the server name, right? There's the table name, right? Right? All these are working. Now, when I get down to this next batch, these have a one and a single quote. You can see that these are not working. Right? Again, triggering the error, but it's echoing back the syntax I sent to it. So it's not working. So why do people love Burp Suite so much? It's because now you see that I just made my manual testing so much more efficient. Because what if I was on a website? Let's go file type, ASPX. I'm just looking for something I don't know, but URL article. semicolon. Here we go. All right, so I'm clicking on this bad boy, and it's got article ID, right? And it's got parameter passing. Now, what if right here I send a single quote? Now, I send a single quote, and nothing happened. You guys see that? I sent a single quote, nothing happened. Now, if you wanted to test this further by hand, that would get pretty tedious. What would be cool in Burp Suite would be to send that parameter send that exact address to intruder, and then give it a whole list of stuff to try, because maybe a single quote doesn't work, maybe a double quote works, maybe he wants dash dash at the end of it, maybe he wants an asterisk. So that's what you're really gaining, right? The ability to try so much more. Now, guys, this is not the only feature of Burp Suite, but this is an example of why people prefer Burp Suite, because it gets to say, okay, I can do my manual testing the way that I teach you, right? Is it talking to a database? I send a single quote. If I see parameter passing, I send a single quote. Now, the next case, I do the exact same thing. So let's say question number 2. Question number 2 is, if you see parameter, can I or someone else see what I type? So here's an example of where you can see what you type. Here's a search box. So in that search box, I definitely want to try cross-site scripting. That's awesome. But it's not uncommon for your cross-site scripting to not work. Let's say, for example, I did it with this XSS like this, right? And you'll see that this doesn't work. So that cross-site scripting that I did with the 1, 2, 3 worked. The cross-site scripting that I did with the letters XSS did not work. So you could go back and you could say, okay, I want to try XSS, but I want to put it in single quotes. Okay, that didn't work. So now I want to put it in double quotes. Okay, that worked. Well, if you go back to your fuzz database, whoops, you could go to attack, you could go to XSS, and you could load like the RSnake list of all of these different cross-site scriptings. And then you could see which one worked, right? So the same way that you iterated through it for SQL injection would be the same way that you would do it for cross-site scripting. It'd be the exact same thing. This is why people this is why they like it. They go, oh, they're messing with the website and they go, oh, I see, here's a search box. Let me load this cross-site scripting fuzz list. Let me hit it real quick. Yeah, it looks like it's vulnerable, or no, it doesn't. So what you would do by hand is everywhere that you saw where you or someone else can see what you type, a search box, a forum, a guest book, a contact us box, a instant messenger, any one of those places, you would insert your cross-site scripting and see if it worked. Now, why Burp Suite would be better, as an example, would be something like intruder. Okay. All right. Now your last one is, does it reference a file? So trying to see if the page references a file, here would be an example. Let's say I went here, and can you see that the parameter passing references a file? So because the parameter passing references a file on the local file system, I'm going to try to see if I can read the etc pass.wd file. And you see that I can, in fact, read it. So you say to yourself, well, I go back to my fuzz database, and what I want to look for is called an LFI, a local file include. So I want to see, hey, can you reference any common files that I might want you to try and pull up, right? So it just gives you a nice little list of files to say, hey, can you get to any of these? Okay. And then you could load that the same way that you saw me do it for SQL injection. So I could manually try to read the etc password, then try to read the etc issue and go, oh, see, it's running Red Hat, right? I could manually do a remote file include, right? So let's go in URL. In URL, oh, excuse me. Let's go, no.text file type txt. So here's a file. I could grab this, and then what I could do is right here, I could put that file here. So now what you just did is you just did what's called a remote file include, where you made the website point to a remote file. Okay. File name is no longer pointing to a local file, he's pointing to a remote file. So now that that's the case, you can see the contents of your remote file show up in the screen. Well, you can build your own fuzz list of this stuff to try all these different types, to see if you can pull, an RFI, right? So just really, really, really handy. So here's a nice list of RFIs, right? Huge, huge, huge list, right? So there's just so much of this stuff, right? This is why people like Burp Suite. And I think you can see, for me, Intruder is definitely the thing that I like, because I like to load my own fuzz database and go off and do that stuff. But hopefully you see that here's the stuff that I try. So are you noticing for each page, I try one or two things manually? And that's how I kind of know what attack path to go down. Now, if you want to be more thorough, then you can load these fuzz databases per page. Now, you can't load these massive fuzz databases to try every single attack known to man on every single page. You have to kind of get a feel and go, oh, yeah, I beat up on that pretty hard for SQL injection. I don't think I need to go that hard. Or you do something and it gives you a hint like, oh, it threw an error. So then you throw a better list at it. Nope, still nothing. Then you throw a better list at it. Well, still not what I want. Then you throw a better list at it. Oh, finally got that SQL injection to work. That's generally how you're going to see people use this. Okay? All right. Okay, I say let's stop right there. Let's take a break. Let me make sure that I get these other students their login info. Okay, let's make sure. Do I have any questions before we go to break? Oh, can I share my fuzz database? Absolutely. Acunetics does this automated test. Burp is what allows you to do this manually. Yes, that's correct. Okay, while I was testing one of the web applications, I'm trying to attack PHP session parameter, okay? When I put in one of the payloads in the PHP session ID, it's giving a 200 OK. Does that mean it's vulnerable? Probably not. If it were vulnerable, it's probably going to give a 500 error if it's vulnerable to SQL injection. Okay, if you ask for something, and I get a page that I want, a valid page, it's going to give me a 200 OK. If I insert my single quote and it throws an error page, it's probably going to give a 500 internal error. When you look at it in Burp, you want the ones that are giving, for SQL injection at least, 500, right? For cross-site scripting, right, those are probably going to be your 200 OKs, right? He gave you back the page that you asked for, right? But we'll get to that. Okay, guys, let's take a quick break.